Environmental groups are urging the government to reject Israeli-linked oil company Navitas Petroleum's bid for rights to operate in the strategic offshore Orange Basin. In a letter to the country's Mineral and Petroleum Resources Minister, Gwede Mantashe, the organizations called on the government to reject companies and activities they say contribute to Israel's occupation and alleged genocide in Palestine or cause irreversible harm to the oceans and climate. They warn that approving Navitas involvement could worsen climate change and have severe long-term consequences for human rights and the environment. And for more on this, we are joined on the line by Roshan Dadoo, the coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition. Roshan, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you for inviting us onto the show.
Now, Roshan, why is the South African BDS Coalition calling on government to reject Navitas Petroleum's involvement in the Orange Basin?
Well, the Navitas Petroleum Company is an Israeli company listed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So it's clearly a complicit company. And of course, as South Africa, we have taken Israel to the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention. And out of that, from the provisional measures, there have been rulings that may oblige state parties to do all they can to prevent and to punish the plausible crime of genocide. And that includes taking actions against further complicity ourselves by getting involved with trade and investment and so on with the state of Israel. And I mean, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange says on its own website that it's dedicated to empower the Israeli public businesses and different industry sectors. Our mission is to encourage technological innovation, creativity, and transparency as a means to create a real value for investors and the general public, and to position the Israeli economy as a global leader. Now, if we are on the one hand taking Israel to court to claim that it is continuing the genocide in Gaza, as well as the advisory opinion that the court ruled on the illegality of the occupation. And at the same time, right now, Israel is trying to legislate to build over 1,000 new settlements in an area of land, E1, around East Jerusalem that would divide up the West Bank. These are all still going on currently now, and the genocide in Gaza hasn't stopped. If we are going to take seriously our own commitment that we made, then following the ICJ advisory, the vote on the resolution in the UN General Assembly, where a supermajority voted in effect for countries to take measures of sanctions, why would it make sense to, of all companies, enable an Israeli company to not only come here but to exploit our natural resources? It's, not in our national interest, clearly. Plus, these oil exploration blocks around the West Coast and also the southern coast and east coast have been challenged numerous times by the environmental justice organizations on behalf of the local coastal communities. Most recently on Friday, actually, there was a very strong ruling from the Constitutional Court that has now stopped Shell being able to exploit oil off the east coast, off our east coast. And that judgment made it clear that you can't say that oil companies and communities have the same power. You have to take in consideration and have proper processes of consultation with communities before you allow companies whose sole purpose is to make profit that doesn't anyway accrue to South Africa, have these exploration permissions to cause what potentially could be also unrepairable environmental damage to our oceans.
Now, Roshan, what precedent would approving a Navitas involvement set for South Africa's broader economic and diplomatic relationship with Israeli companies?
Well, I think it would set a very bad example. Already, South Africa is being seen as, on the one hand, welcomed by millions of people around the world for taking this case at the ICJ, for its stance within the UN system, for taking such a position to really challenge Israel and say this is genocide. But on the other hand, we are still trading, we still have sporting and cultural relations. We have actually no policy or measures in place to ensure that we are complying with the very legal obligations we've brought about. And the legal obligations, it is actually binding on state parties. And you would think that South Africa, having taken that case and produced, in a sense, those provisional measures and those binding legal obligations, would be at the forefront of actually implementing them, especially as we're also co-chair of the Hague Group of States that specifically came together to ensure that countries were taking measures, implementing, taking action to fulfill those legal obligations. And Namibia is also a member of the Hague Group, one of the founding members, and this oil exploration block also would have an impact on Namibian coastal communities and their oceans.
Now, your coalition has also raised environmental concerns. You touched on them earlier. But what specific risks does offshore oil exploration in the Orange Basin pose to marine ecosystems and coastal communities?
Well, there are a number of international legal obligations, also environmentally. Particularly arising from the Paris Agreement, the climate framework, and more recently, there was another ruling and an advisory opinion in the International Court of Justice, which put particular obligations onto state parties, specifically also around fossil fuels and around exploration as well as production of fossil fuels. And the court ruled that the states have an environmental obligation similar to the ones they have around not aiding and abetting states committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. So it's interesting that in a way these two things come together, but they also come together because Palestinians have been calling what's one of the aspects of the genocide also ecocide. And we know that, if you have 68,000 tons of rubble, the dust, the effect on people's health just from that, apart from the fact that the complete destruction of people and the actual environment has made the land in Gaza actually unlivable because of all the contamination. If you target the sewerage systems, the infrastructure, the water systems, the rubbish is piling up, rats are biting children in the flimsy tents in which they're living. And all of this is not only killing people now, but killing children is killing the future. And if you destroy the very land that people were farming, were living on, and having agriculture on, then you're also killing it for future generations. And that's, in a sense, a similar aspect. People are calling it ecocide because similarly, you're genociding the environment.
The environment.
And it's time
Well,
when
Roshan,
we're
unfortunately,
crisis.
we are right. We have run out of time, but I have to ask this very quickly in about 15 seconds. If the government approves Navitas involvement, despite your objections, what legal, political, or public action will the BDS coalition consider taking?
Well, we'll certainly make it very publicly clear that that South Africa is behaving in what can only be considered a hypocritical way in relation to its obligations to sanction Israel. But we'll also be taking it up, demanding a full public participation process to ensure that there can't be any, as oil companies often do, shortcuts taken, and to raise up the fact that we ought to also be defending people and the planet, not just selling off our resources for profit.
Roshan, we have run out of time. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update. We'll leave it there for today.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. That's Roshan Dadoo, the coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition, joining us on the line.